Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final panel in the symposium. My name is Clement Valla, and I'm a professor and the program coordinator for the Computation, Technology, and Culture program here at RISD. So we brought out 3 guests together for a discussion about computational poetics, literacy, and access. And I hope that we can discuss what's distinctive about computational art. How does art created with the computer differ from less automated art? Is there a distinction at all? And then finally, I hope that we can create a more nuanced conversation about AI art that gets beyond all of the crita hype. So our first speaker today is Christiane Paul. She is an acclaimed writer and curator specializing in new media arts. Honored with the Toma Foundation's 2016 Arts Writing Award in Digital Art. Her key publications that are also outside, I will shill for Christiane, include A Companion to Digital Art and Digital Art, among others. As adjunct curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum of American Art, she's curated such significant exhibitions as Corey Archangel Pro Tools and is behind Artport, the museum's internet art platform. Paul's curatorial projects extend internationally with notable exhibitions such as Programmed at the Whitney and the Public-Private at the New School. I'm going to introduce all 3 speakers now, and then Christiane will come on. Christiane will be followed by Taeyoon Choi. Taeyoon is an interdisciplinary artist who intertwines science, technology, and human interaction through programming, drawing, and writing. His work, including collaborations with artists like Christine Sam Kim, and organizing the Code Ecologies Conference with Nabil Hussain and Sonia Bowler, highlights the environmental and societal impacts of technology. His contributions have been showcased globally, from the New Museum to the Shanghai Biennial, and supported by the Open Society and Knight Foundations. Choi is a co-founder of the School for Poetic Computation and has significantly influenced alternative education and technology discourse. His projects promote a more inclusive and caring digital world, underpinned by his roles in prestigious residencies and educational initiatives. Our final speaker will be Dorothy R. Santos, who is a multidisciplinary Filipino-American storyteller, poet, artist, and scholar with a PhD in film and digital media from UC Santa Cruz. Their work spans voice recognition, assistive tech, and feminist media histories, among other areas. Santos has exhibited at notable venues like Ars Electronica and Yerba Buena's Center for the Arts, and their writing is featured in publications such as Art in America and Vice Motherboard. Currently, they are visiting assistant professor at UC Santa Cruz, contributing to the Everett Program for Technology and Social Change. Hello. All right, thanks for still being with us, everybody. This has been a really amazing day. Thank you for the 3 talks. So as I was listening to you, and Ben kind of brought this up yesterday, and Dorothy, you and I were talking about this at lunch. The CEO of NVIDIA recently told us not to learn how to code. NVIDIA took care of that, so we're done. A decade and a half ago, George Bush told us all to code, and so that was gonna solve the economic crisis in America. And yet I feel like under these kind of generalities, at least in the 3 of your work, there is a sense that like maybe learning and getting to the hyper-specificity of technology or of different ways of engaging with technology might actually be the kind of more interesting, more relevant, more helpful thing to do rather than disengagement. So I think that's where I wanted to start. We're at an art school, with that kind of generic sense, like learn to code, don't learn to code. What the 3 of your thoughts are on that kind of broad yet generic phrase. I know that's big, but I thought maybe we could start there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, lots of thoughts there. I mean, if NVIDIA or Facebook tells us don't learn to code, like how much are we going to have to pay every month for somebody else to do that? And who's going to provide the support for that? Like, it's this feudal model where we have to subscribe and be subjected to the power. So I am all for kind of advancing tools for expression, communication, but I think if we cannot fix it, we don't own it. So that agency to repair and maintain is the key to true ownership.
I also firmly believe in literacy when it comes to coding. I also see that, of course, NVIDIA or companies have a vested interest in telling you, oh, don't do that, we'll take care of it, no problem. I am not a coder, I'm not a programmer, and I effectively would not be able to do my job if I wouldn't have the basics down. And wouldn't know differences between Python and C and Lisp and all the languages in which the artists whose work I'm bringing into the collection have been writing. I mean, on a daily basis, it's about what needs to be emulated. Understanding the Harold Cohen exhibition and what the artist has done requires a certain kind of literacy in code. And I think everybody, once again, should take classes, even if you would never code professionally or need to have a deeper understanding. But I don't know how we can even understand the world we are operating in which, whether you get a loan. I recently was kicked off an insurance where the person said, the system rejected you. I can't tell you why. And that was honest, you know? So even the people who are selling you vital things do not know why those decisions are being made. We're drifting more and more into a black box. And I think having at least a basic understanding of the operating principles is absolutely crucial. Yeah.
Well, first of all, okay. Well, there's a switch. Okay, there we go.
Thank you. Well, first of all, anyone who tells me to do anything or not do anything, I'm not going to listen, because you can ask my immigrant Filipino mom. I did everything that she didn't want me to do, like become an artist and go to grad school. But that was the first thing that I wanted to say. And I think it kind of prompts the second thought that I had, joking aside, which is in preparation for our conversation, I actually skimmed through the White House report on computational literacy and found some really not surprising but also just as disturbing things, such as why the White House would want us to have computer literacy, not just in our schools and even outside of the institution, but a lot of it is for what would you think? I'll just tell you, cybersecurity. My partner and I, Aurum Stern, another scholar and artist, one of my favorites. But in our conversation, we were talking about this kind of computational hygiene, or like a digital hygiene, where it's like you have to be clean, you have to know the system. And that's what this report actually communicates to its reader. And I actually looked at who was on the panel and committee to develop this report, and there are no artists, which doesn't surprise anyone. But the point of it is that computational literacy to the US government is so clearly, it's for our protection. You are literate because you protect. It's like a type of patriotism. So it's always interesting for me when I think of like what undergirds someone's interest in me not coding or not coding, or coding or not coding. But very much in agreement with what Taeyoon and Christiane have communicated, because I do run coding workshops with some of my students, and they ask me, why am I learning this, Dorothy? And I was like, well, did you have fun? They go, well, yeah, I totally had fun. And it kind of makes me want to make more stuff. And I go, well, this is why we did it.
So on a follow-up on that, I mean, I guess so that's maybe from the student point of view, but Christiane, you told me this anecdote of people walking into the Harold Cohen Aaron exhibition and asking what prompts Harold Cohen had used. So I wonder, to a larger degree, and then of course you showed the image that I wanted to bring up that won the competition, that sort of like sci-fi space opera image, and I'm wondering the degree to which some of what we're talking about are totally like context-free images. Ben, you were talking about this yesterday, with just form, right? Totally context-free images, and how much like an understanding of the process is not only necessary, but is the baseline literacy to even be able to engage with certain kinds of artworks. So Christiane, I just wanted to start with you, but I guess for Dorothy and Taeyoon too.
Yeah, once again, I would reiterate what Kate Crawford and Ben yesterday teased out in the conversation, this understanding of image data sets and where they come from, and even how the tagging is done and what is inscribed in that, I think is absolutely essential to understanding the image worlds that we live in today. It's also, there are artists like Michael Mandiborg, for example, who has done a lot of investigations of stock imagery, and the massive, or I think the most production of them came or comes out of Ukraine, Russia, Azerbaijan. Those are the main countries producing those images. I was always interested and wanted to check on it, what's happening right now, given that Ukraine was one of the biggest suppliers of them. But you already see the inscribed bias in all of that. And the image world will inhabit, model collapse or not, is more and more dictated by that. And I think it's, once again, absolutely crucial to understand that. And also, basically having an aesthetic literacy of these images. There are, of course, some people who can immediately tell this was style GAN, this was, and to really have the aesthetics of every generations of GANs down, But it will also help with deepfakes and anything else to have an idea of what the indicators are, how those images are processed.
Well, I mean, I don't think we have to go all the way to AI or large image sets or tools. I often fantasize about a world where, let's say, entire faculties of RISD agreed to boycott Adobe in all of our classroom for whatever reason. And how much more interesting all the student work will be. And like, oh my God, what are they gonna do with all their time and like ability, critical thinking, or hacking the computers, or creating different open source tools? Perhaps that could be across not only RISD, but across different arts and humanities education, and see what we can do, because they're gonna need to use that anyway when they graduate. They could go to YouTube and find all the tutorials. Why are we wasting their $57,000 a year to teach Adobe tutorials? Like, that's nonsense. We could do so much more.
Because I want you to move on to your next question, but plus one to Taeyoon's point, because I feel in a lot of ways when teaching open source software, this is actually the same student who asked me, well, why are we learning this? Why are we doing this? And a part of me is, when you give students the choice of helping build something new, or maybe building something on their own, I think to me, to witness the joy that I feel like I need to see, from being cynical, is what Taeyoon is actually describing. Also the fact that Adobe has such a stronghold in the creative realm, but not only that, they cut your access off as a student. And I just don't get it. I mean, this is something, again, that the very thing that they were striving to learn, they don't have access to anymore. So, yeah.
I think it's also the best way of learning operations and structures of these softwares. You learn them better if you try to do it yourself and fail at it or struggle with it.
Great. So maybe one or two more questions, but this is maybe kind of on the tail end of this question. Something that I think underpins this whole debates in AI conference that maybe I want to bring to the front a little bit is, we started this morning with a discussion of the Luddites. Are that the human technology relationships? Christiane, you mentioned the Turing test really quickly. Corey talked about this idea of the centaur. Dorothy had this wonderful idea of the maker-sister. Harold Cohen, in his show Aaron, talked about Aaron as a gap maker. So I think these very kind of nuanced, complex human, non-human relationships, and I wonder if the three of you just had very specifically this idea of the human, non-human relationship and the what I see as the creative potential in that relationship, and if you could talk about that a little bit. Ambiguous, but hopefully maybe creative relationship.
Yeah, I think a lot of our life in general is today what the machine wants to hear from us. I mean, who hasn't struggled with automated systems? And it's really about, what do you want from me right now? What prompt do I need to give you to get from A to B? You know? So that's a banal level of that interaction, but I think our life is about this already. And I think it's crucial to take a step back and once again look at the operational structures of those systems and how we could counteract them, mess with them, intervene in them. And I think there's a lot of room for poetic interventions there. But we're already there. We have been conforming to the machines for a long, long time.
I mean, I personally am very split about that question because on the one hand, there are people using AI and large machine learning systems to bring equity for larger population, that bring access to resources. You know, it could be used in that way. At the same time, this Audre Lorde code of like the master's tool will never dismantle master's house. And this complicit nature of these technologies will always hunt us down more we depend on them. So I think what we can do for students and the community is actually critical thinking with the technology as opposed to only the creative use of the technology. Because we need to be able to question the tech itself and use the tech against the power structure that it serves to have more agency and collective accountability.
But I would say, to me, that is a form of creative use. I mean, that's for me a deeper understanding of creative use rather than just a prompt generating something. So,
I'll add that this is highly poetic and less computational, but I think I always try to craft assignments with students thinking about the everyday and what might feel banal and mundane, and allowing them to use a tool that they have like for experimentation purposes. And one of the assignments I gave a couple of years ago, it actually involved a chat simulation. So I said, you don't have to have a traditional chat the way it looks on iOS. So this is maybe a little bit related to your question, but I'm veering a little bit off. I'm talking a little bit more about pedagogy and how you can have this relationship with a non-human thing. But the prompt that I gave the students was, what is a chat? Rewrite a chat you've had and include images, things that you might want to see that maybe you forgot. And the other option was write a chat that you wish you had or that you want to hear. And most students chose the latter. And I said, you could use anything you want. It doesn't have to be prescriptive. Here are like 3 tools that I'm suggesting, but they're mere suggestions. And I saw the most beautiful stories. Some of them like made me cry because of their relationship with confronting a technology that they could make bend, not to be like revisionist, but like that they could rethink something that was mediated through a technology. And so having a much more intentional use of it through those types of exercises. And I don't assign things I don't do myself, so. Yeah.
Great, I think maybe we can open it up to, right?
Any questions?
Okay, questions.
I get it, it's the end of the day.
I know. Here we have one. 1 second, sorry.
I had a specific question, I guess, stemming from the faith bot, but there seems to be a lot of conversations around the political and technical, and I know there's cultural and personal history, but do any of you want to expand on the ontological implications of AI, or if you believe there are any?
I can go, because the first thing that came to my mind was, I'll just give a brief description. I'm working on a project called The Cyborg's Prosody, which I started in 2022. It is a voice-interactive, voice-activated piece. It was supposed to actually serve as a satire, as a parody of accent reduction schools. I was trying to create an accent induction school. And then it became, and obviously a large language learning model is involved. I'm working with Tagalog, just because I'm looking at Filipino call center workers. And then the work totally flipped. It became a game with 5 levels based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And I actually centered it around, and I know grief isn't linear, but just using it as a constraint. But it became a story about my mom's loss of mother tongue. And when she immigrated to the States, 8 months pregnant with me in the late 70s. And, you know, because you're talking about like an ontological root, and for me, that was it. And I think when I talk about that project to most people, and you have to actually mimic the cyborg, which is a Filipino accented voice. So you already are opting in to be uncomfortable, because I don't like making work that's like comfortable. And you know, you either go through the game listening to this voice and mimicking it at certain parts, because it increasingly starts to include Tagalog words, and at the last level 5, it's all in Tagalog. So you're trusting me as the artist that I'm having you mimic things that will be a little bit more, there's an affect there once, if you successfully play the game. The ludic experience is you see everything translated in English. And, but the voice is my mom's voice. And people feel very uncomfortable with that. But then I think, and you know, and some people have even said, why would you make something like that? I said, well, how did you learn language? How are these machines learning language? And the one thing that my longtime mentor asked me was really stuck with my writing. And I said, who would disagree with who would disagree with anything that I'm saying? And my mentor said, oh, Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky would totally disagree with you, because the super intelligence is coming, and that last piece is it's human voice, which is actually still very difficult to mimic. But those are the things that I think about in your question, like when I think about this kind of ontological root, like where's this source, where's kind of the textures and the contours of the work coming from. So that, I mean, hopefully it answers the question a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and really the one at the core of all discussions about AI, yeah, and what being really means. Catherine Hales made this distinction in her reading of the Turing test between the enacted and the represented body, and what is really at stake at the core of the Turing test is that distinction. Also highlighting once again, I mean, Turing test, we usually hear, oh, it's about the distinction between man and machine, but the way Turing formulated it, it was also about gender. It was actually a man and a woman, and not surprisingly, that was very much what was at stake for him in this distinction between enacted and represented. And on that level, you can have a lot of fun with bots. One of my students actually wrote a project for the 100th Turing anniversary. I don't know how many of you have played with Eliza, who is of course not very smart, works just with string substitution, but Eliza absolutely does not understand the verb to be. So the student wrote a whole script about object-oriented ontology, and it's a fascinating and hilarious conversation with Eliza about object-oriented ontology, the best bot to have it with. Yeah. So I think this is really the question we're also going to grapple with. What does intelligence mean? What does being mean? What does being in the world mean?
Yeah, I know I'm just the moderator, but I would also add, like, if you go, there's something really interesting to me about neural networks, right? The technology that all of this is based on, and that that is to say, in a nutshell, neural networks have to do, we model different stages of neurons, right? Which we thought for a long time was the important thing. Like, if you can model all of neurons together, right? If you can get that architecture, you will discover intelligence. It's kind of like the Human Genome Project, right? We were going to solve everything once we got the human genome. And all the map tells you is where things are. What we realized, what neural networks actually do, is that it's the weighted relationships between neurons that actually produce the map that will produce any kind of data. And I'll just add that, like, if this is interesting, neural networks actually just function in one direction. So you take the base input and then you end up with, oh yeah, that's a dog, yeah, that's a cat. But like the human brain, for example, it has 10 times more neurons going the other way. So you have much more complex feedback and interesting relationship. But anyway, that's all to say that I do think this is one of the dangers of saying like this image won an art project is that to me it's all about relationality. And I think Western philosophy for a really long time has tried to ground ontology in like the being of like things and objects. Elisa was talking about like the borders of things. And I think even at its like core, we're realizing the human brain through neural networks doesn't even function that way. It's purely a kind of relational thing. And so I don't know, that's when I like see the work of Taeyoon and I think like, okay, I'm making big metaphoric leaps, but I do think that that's your take on computation, right? And so I think that, I don't know, it's a really interesting question, but I think that relationality between things is really where it's at, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly say, I think it really comes down to the computability and uncomputability, and the latter being ability to resist being counted as either 0 or 1. And having that agency is really the key to have any kinds of capacity for liberation, individually or collectively. And this ontological question is directly related to classification and how do we need, like, what kind of data sets do we need? And who decides who decides the classification and the reward structures of that classification? And are we gonna weight the conveniences that we get from these smart systems, or are we gonna have more of an agency to delete ourselves from that structures of thought? And it's an ongoing conversation with the artists and the students. I think I want to just pivot to this notion that, like, I've been working in like art school, but also engineering schools, and like the feeding system of engineering education to military industrial complex is so real, so that I had some of my best students go work for drone company that makes killing machines, or AI companies that are, you know, just doing terrible things. And there's a very disconnect from their very kind of prestigious and beautiful work environment and the kind of work that they're really doing. And I think that disconnect between the meaning and significance of language is manifested in that disconnect of execution and their complicity.
Yeah, just harping off what y'all were just saying, famous information architect Peter Morville once said, once you categorize something, you can't uncategorize it. And then Kevin Kelly once said, like, you know, having, you know, we've had libraries of books, and, you know, now we're gonna have libraries of different intelligences to basically get perspectives from. Do you think that's, how do you feel about that in terms of like this directional pull towards AGI? And then, two-part question. Other part is basically just about like what you guys were saying about Adobe. Like, Adobe, I'm sure started as like, you know, a novel personal project, and, you know, it eventually just, you know, ballooned and it ballooned. You know, inevitably, if somebody starts like a personal project, it starts having component libraries, it starts having, you know, it starts becoming super, you know, intricate and organized. So how do you sort of guide personal projects away from that?
I mean, I guess I should take the opportunity to say, as someone who worked for Processing Foundation, yeah, that was a really fascinating job to have, because I'm not a programmer. If I do program or I code anything, it's for a very specific project, or I learn a very specific lesson plan, and then that's kind of what gets me through. But what I've witnessed amongst the technologists, artists, educators that I've had that good opportunity to work with at Processing is a lot of it is, and I don't want to use the word community. because I feel like it's beyond that you're developing connections with people, and this is something that Lauren Lee McCarthy, someone who's now a really good friend and longtime like collaborator, colleague, it's changing the language of developer and engineer to contributor. What does it mean to be a contributor to a project that needs maintenance? Everything needs maintenance. I mean, Taeyoon, this is a huge part of your project, or not project, but overall practice is, the care and the maintenance that goes into these different libraries that are being developed, whether through fellowships, whether through learning how to code together, after school, or even for folks who are, wanting to build a project together just because, I mean, I feel like that's the best answer I can give from what I've observed of how, a project, how you can prevent a project from becoming an open source software project, specifically from becoming like abandonware. But yeah, I don't know, I'd love to hear Taeyoon and Christiane's take.
Yeah, I mean, just to answer the second part of the question, I actually think it's not so much a problem of Adobe or any kind of tech, those packages, tools. I think they're gonna do what capitalism tells them to do, which is to scale and sell as much as possible and make us dependent. I think it's more of like the role of the academics that have unquestionably accepted that as the de facto tool for creativity. So it's us that's really the problem. And I think coming back to processing, which is, for those who don't know, it started as a two-person collaboration that was open source kind of drawing software inspired by John Maeda and many other people's designed by numbers. And it really became something more than any of the initial contributors, passed on few generations of leadership, passed on Dorothy's hands, and also it's expanding to diversity and inclusion, racial justice, accessibility in all kinds of forms, more than initial Java package that they created. By the way, the Java package is important, and like that was a beautifully created and maintained code. So I do not underestimate the amount of work that they did to make that, but allowing that to be more than just the initial tool set is the power. So I just want to see more of that. I think we are capable of making that. I think it's not only the software, I think it could be curriculum that I know that many of you are publishing, it could be projects that you're supporting, it could be student body that you're creating that could decenter the power structure from corporate monopoly to something else.
Yeah, it's that systemic change that is so difficult. I think it would be so great if we had better libraries of intelligences. And I also had that conversation with people yesterday. Often, I think in the mainstream, it looks like, oh, Google developed this or OpenAI developed this. But look at where the softwares come from. The University of Munich, Cristobal at ITP. Very often these come out of educational institutions, and those end up being the seeds for these massive corporate projects. Could we change that system? Could there be other funding structures where we hold on to those systems and develop them in a very different way? That would be a dream of systemic change, I think.
You had a question? Where's the microphone?
One more in the front, sorry.
Right here, yeah.
Just really just a couple of quick comments, more than a question, but maybe it will lead to a small question in the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts or feedback on my comment. The first one just being that one thing I've been thinking all day today is that selfishly I kind of wish that Mark Fisher, aka K-Punk, were around still to write a book about everything that's happening now, because I'd love to read it. And yet at the same time, I'm almost happy for him that he's not. I say this as sort of a Luddite / general AI abolitionist who does still appreciate everything I've heard today from the artists interacting with technology and AI in different ways. But I think the second comment that goes to is that what I really feel like after being here all day today, last night, reading Kate Crawford's book, reading some of Corey's books, reading too much probably this week and leading up to it, is that what I really feel like we're having a conversation about is not the technology, but I feel like we're just having a conversation about capitalism. And I am curious maybe what your thoughts might be on that, but I guess really at the end of the day, the reason I consider myself even like, oh, I'm a Luddite, I'm this, is not because I don't see the value in these sort of wild out there progressive technologies that might even have some open ends and questions to them. It's really that I guess I'm a firm believer, unfortunately, that at the end of the day, we just can't seem to have nice things. Like I've gotten in so many, I don't want to say debates, I don't want to say arguments, maybe spicy debates with friends about autonomous vehicles as just one little example, because they're like, well, yeah, but driving the car's not safe. I'm like, you're still driving the car. And I guess the idea for me sounds fantastic if it worked the way we wanted it to. But yeah, I do fall into the camp of people that I'm like, I just don't trust us to get to that point safely. And I guess the last thing I'll say is just kind of on the point of it feeling like we're having a discussion about capitalism itself. It's like, we wouldn't have these concerns about the technology taking away from other types of artists if it weren't for, the value of artists as they are now in society and the way we kind of compensate them or value them or treat their jobs and things. So if we could be guaranteed that, other artists would still be able to live financially, we wouldn't be worried about this. I don't think we'd be worried about AI doing this or that, if it weren't for the bottomlessly extractive nature of the technologies like we talked about earlier this morning. If it weren't for that and we felt like we could limit it and we felt like we could just do it to the point that was helpful, I think a lot fewer of us would be terrified of it. So I guess the only question of that is maybe if you have any, thoughts on that, but I will shut up otherwise, and thank you very much.
Well, go ahead, Dorothy.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you with talking about hyper-capitalist structures, and AI is just an extension of that in the form we're seeing it today. I'm not talking about the artistic engagement with them and counteracting them, but this is all deeply tied together. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also not that we can blame everything on AI. It's already embedded in the capitalist structure of our world, and it's not completely clear to me where this will all be going, and how and if it will burn out. But it's in the moment, I think we still have to critically engage with it and do as much as we can. And so many things that were discussed today, from labor laws and other issues, will be absolutely crucial in counteracting this. And maybe it's even helpful that all of these AI debates are happening because they are an accelerator of developments we need.
Thank you for your question. I feel like very viscerally what you said reminded me of some of the research that I'm doing with 911 dispatchers and, a lot of the interest around language detection software being used to help them with their jobs, because they're actually, these are people that are working 12 to 14 hours. That means there's no plateau. Your adrenaline is up the whole time. And the whole time we've been at the symposium, and this is just an ongoing thought process for me, I think of what are the use cases that actually would be useful. And so that's one of the things that I thought of, but I think a lot of my own investment in my creative practice being around accent bias is really also speaking to, software is being developed with a really insidious goal in mind. One of them is Sanas.ai. I'm not sure how many of you know, it's spelled SANAS. AI. It essentially is think of an Instagram filter for your voice. This is being used in India and the Philippines to do real-time accent elimination so that the voice on the other line actually sounds like an anglicized voice or an American voice. So these are the types of things that I'm studying and kind of processing, or what Christina Corfield, a really brilliant media scholar and artist, says is like thinking through making. And that's how I process how we deal with this kind of greater issue of, hyper advanced capitalism that, you've actually pointed to. But there's so much more to say, but yeah, Taeyoon, please.
I mean, it's another big topic, but really quickly, I don't really like to talk about isms, because I think they could be misinterpreted, but I will, if you were my friend, if we were having a drink, I'll just say, I'm actually okay with certain aspects of capitalism. And this comes from working with directly people of the global south and hearing about their experiences of oppression done under the name of socialism or communism. And what they want is not $2 million package funding or tech infrastructure. They want ability to use capitalism to have agency, to have more of independence. So if money is a tool that we could use to liberate, I think that's okay. That comes with this really important condition that because capitalism has always worked in tandem with colonialism, it's really hard to separate the two. So colonialism is something that I feel unquestionably wrong. And I think that's related to racism or kind of the prison and kind of police system in the United States and other kinds of immigration infrastructure that this country is based on. So it's an ongoing question about what aspects of capitalism should we keep or utilize and empower people, and what kinds of decolonial practice do we need to bring to the present now to have a tangible outcome.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for being here all day. And thank you to Daniel and Marissa.